The late movie director and artist David Lynch posted more and less cryptic videos on his YouTube page, but often they had positive and life-affirming messages. In one of these he said, "I'm wearing dark glasses because I am seeing the future and it's looking very bright." However, when we look around us, at the world and our history, it really does seem that there has been very little of that promised goodness going around. In H.P. Lovecraft's horror stories, the evil was this sense of a foreboding, indeterminate dark force in the horizon, but to me it seems that the darkness is not in the horizon, but in the human spirit, right under the surface of what exists. Let's look at philosophy, political theory, and historical examples to make sense of this, why the world so often is a cruel and oppressive place. For clarity's sake, I'll be simplifying Hegel's thesis. The master-slave dialectic refers to the idea that for a human being to exist, his self is only actualized through other people. A solitary animal in nature, the type that just hunts by itself and not in a pack, is complete, it is being for itself. For man, a social creature, he is bound to others and is defined by the greater linkage to society. In a sense, his self-consciousness is outside of itself. This self-consciousness will only come to being through recognition. If you think about little children, a child's sense of self-worth and feelings of safety will only come through the loving attention of parents and kindness and fairness of other adults. You are being seen, you are heard, you are taken care of. If a person doesn't get these things in his childhood, he will often try to find it from some other place as an adult. For example, psychological studies about politicians have revealed that many of them have had neglected childhoods, and now they are seeking a substitute through the acceptance of the great public. Still, a good or a bad childhood isn't the end of the recognition process. For Hegel, self-consciousness is deeply bothered by the fact that it is outside of itself, in the other, so it must sublate this otherness. As adults too, people crave recognition. If you would be seen as a valued member of society, and you yourself would recognize the other person as a valued member of society, on paper this need would be satisfied, but in reality it isn't enough. Hegel talks about how in life or death struggle, each self-consciousness proves its worth to itself, and through that both prove their worth to each other. If you think about archaic societies, the ones who were the most ready to face danger and push through it were very valuable members for the tribe, and besides nature, other tribes were the opponents and obstacles. The individual who has not risked his life may be recognized as a person, but he has not achieved the truth of being recognized as a self-sufficient self-consciousness. Those members of the tribe who were not ready to face danger would be on a lower ladder or even be an impediment to the tribe. But the process doesn't stop here either. This same drive, the drive for recognition, is aimed at other people in general, since everyone is seen as a hindrance for a truly independent self-consciousness. An individual must be recognized as a superior for it to be rid of the burden of the other, and only the one who rises above all others truly owns himself and is his own being. In history, ever since the rise of civilization, societies have been formed around empires. A small group becomes the elites and it lords over the others. But then, as the empire grows and its borders meet other neighboring empires, a competition starts. Which one of the empires is superior? The societies become locked in conflict until the other one is submitted. If this cannot be achieved, it will remain as the ultimate long-term goal. In the modern world, the United States is willing to go to any lengths to retain its hegemony, first aiming to take out Russia and then China. Russia is bitter from the fall of the Soviet Union, and it seeks to recover the lost status. China too is seething from the 100 years of humiliation under Western imperialism, as it wants to be a great power once again. In history books, many statesmen have expressed worries about their countries becoming second or third-rate powers. When states cannot compete militarily, they will find other avenues. Communism became synonymous with success at the Olympic Games through East Germany. The country was in ruins and they had nothing to show off with, so they started to focus on sports to demonstrate how communism would lead to the perfection of man. Today, the Nordic countries have very extensive welfare systems compared to other countries, and this has become a shining point about their inherently high morality. On the level of regular people, many aim for a higher status too. Education and higher incomes are a way to elevate oneself, and prowess in sports or art will also make you special. People are willing to pay exorbitant prices for status items, even though they would otherwise be the same or even worse than the no-brand product. Despite how much there has been talk about equality ever since the French Revolution, people don't truly seem to desire it, they want hierarchy. In Soviet Union and China, everyone was supposed to be a comrade, but the state developed a complex bureaucracy to give out status. I've had jobs where people are required to have different levels of college degrees, but in reality, every single worker was doing the same exact job despite the title, and the job was so simple that you would not require any sort of an education to begin with. Still, many clung to their higher titles with tooth and claw, and they made it known that they were above the lower class. Napoleon was famous for his cynical quotes in life. "If you give a man a medal, he will do anything," was one of these lines, and he hasn't been the only one to realize this fact. Kings of old gave titles with pompous ceremonies to their followers, so they wouldn't have to give out money or land. In today's world, some people are willing to live lives that outwards shine of success, but in reality they are overworked and they have no time for friends or family, and they don't really enjoy the material possessions either. A local owner of a huge department store where I live has basically a mansion, but he spends the whole day in his tiny office, and his wife and his kids left him because he works all the time. Wealth itself becomes the same status symbol as the medal. The scene in American Psycho where the yuppies show off their business cards is on point, both in the smaller and in the greater schemes. In the 90s, political scientist Francis Fukuyama saw the master-slave dialectic as the process into democratization, as people in authoritarian countries would start to demand for their recognition. This didn't happen, possibly due to the fact that people want their recognition from their immediate environment, and they want the higher status more than a higher standard of living. In political science, one approach is called political realism. Focusing on security issues, the world is seen to be in an anarchic state, where there is no higher authority over the nations of the world. The result is that the number one worry for any state is its security. If you would have Nation A and Nation B right next to each other, and neither of them would have any desire to fight the other, the end result isn't peace. Even if both of them express their views on how war wouldn't help their case at all and how there are no reasons to fight, neither of the nations can trust the other. Whatever assurances the other is giving, they could secretly be preparing for an attack. To counter this, nations build up their defenses. Once this is done, the opposing nation notices the build-up in armaments, and it starts to seriously doubt that the neighboring nation is lying about their peaceful visions, and in turn it starts to strengthen its defenses. The end result is a Mexican standoff like in the Western movies, where everyone is pointing guns at each other, just waiting who shoots first. You can have defensive realism, where nations just build up defenses, or offensive realism, where the logic is that they should attack while there is still time and get rid of the threat. The concept of the balance of power steps in. The idea isn't clearly defined, as it has meant different things for different people, but I'm referring to this train of thought. Let's say there are nations A, B, and C. If A and B team up to take out C, you will end up with a scenario where you won't know whether A or B is the stronger one after the conflict, and then they are at each other's throats, so the future is unpredictable. If any of the nations grow strong enough to take either one of the other two nations down, that isn't good either, so the two weaker nations will then seek to ally with each other to counter the strongest nation. When the power is in the correct balance, however, you won't end up in a war because the nations are roughly equal and the alliance system will even out the playing field. With this, you will have peace, and no single nation will have any incentive to start fighting, since the end result will be worse than the situation is now. When some differences will end up in a war, the fighting will be limited, and you won't aim at the total destruction of the enemy, because everyone will want for the balance of power to remain. After the Napoleonic Wars, European powers committed to this model for the sake of their own survival. There were about 100 years of relative peace without major wars inside Europe until the First World War. One factor, however, was that the European powers could spread their competition outside of Europe in their conquering of new colonial territories. The scale was in danger of tipping towards a greater war from time to time, but the model held until Otto von Bismarck, the German Chancellor, was forced out of power by Kaiser Wilhelm II. Wilhelm was extremely bellicose and a poor statesman, and his actions ruined the carefully crafted alliance system that Bismarck had built up, and Germany was becoming too powerful and warlike for the other European powers. The Mexican standoff intensified, and Germans themselves felt that they would need to strike out sooner than later. The assassination of Duke Franz Ferdinand was just an excuse to get the war going before it would have been too late for Germany. In the Cold War, the nuclear weapons changed the situation. You couldn't fight wars straight up like before, since nukes assured a mutual destruction. Fighting was and is done now by proxy wars, where one party is engaged in conflict in a single place, and then the opposing great powers are providing support more or less secretly without officially being the enemy. A scary thought is that in an alternative world without nuclear weapons, we would have fought the Third World War over many times. Some think that the threat of a total annihilation is the only thing keeping the world together. The security dilemma can also lead to the case called Thucydides' trap, where one nation will almost inevitably end in a conflict with a suddenly rising power. In the ancient times, when Athens was becoming more and more powerful, Sparta saw that it had no choice but to take down this fresh competitor. Neither of them wanted to fight, and the leaders did everything they could to solve the situation peacefully, but a smaller skirmish between two small allies finally forced the greater war to start. Same happened between the United States and the Japanese Empire, where Japan was suddenly becoming a regional power that threatened American interests. Again, neither wanted to fight, but the attack on Pearl Harbor was launched out of desperation, so that the Japanese could possibly have a fighting chance before it was too late. Ultimately, Japan had started a fight it couldn't possibly win. Two weak nations are in danger of being cannibalized. Western imperialism steamrolled over basically everyone, and China would have been divided between the conquerors completely if they just would have had the chance to go all the way. The inherent logic of geopolitics very easily leads into a dog-eat-dog world. Continuing with the historical examples, in the 1800s, China really did try to modernize, but in the end it just couldn't. They bought Western weapons and had their armies trained in the new ways of warfare, but China couldn't go all the way with the reforming of their society. The elites who held the power were scared that if they would rock the boat too much, they would be thrown overboard. To secure their position, too little was done and too late. Besides this, another factor was just simple pride. China had been the strongest civilization for centuries, and it couldn't take the fact that it really was now the underdog, despite its rich history and culture, and it saw the Western powers just as upstart barbarians. In its pride and blind desire to keep things how they had always been, Imperial China faced its demise. One theory about why the West went so far ahead in the 1800s in technology and innovation in general is about competition. China was the top player for centuries, but once at the top, they had no incentives to innovate and break old molds. Europe, however, was a backwards periphery ever since the western part of the Roman Empire fell, and instead of a one big empire that lorded over the area, you had many smaller kingdoms and nations. They were all locked into conflict and competition with their neighbors, so there was a need for more and more powerful weapons and more advanced military tactics. Besides this, the Europeans desperately wanted to find trade routes by sea to India, since without them they had to have their wares go through the Middle East, which limited their possibilities to get rich. If you look at the world map, it seems pretty inevitable that Europeans would accidentally end up into the Americas, since the continents are neighbors despite the vast ocean. China also did expeditions with its ships in its history, ending up very far from China, but these were stopped and apparently the ships were even burned, since these trips now introduced an unpredictable element to domestic politics. Other examples exist, such as the Roman Empire being in its beginning just a small backward city, but this gave them a motivation and a drive to succeed. And in its final stages, it couldn't innovate to get out from its predicaments, since this would have shaken the status quo. The first steam engine was invented in Alexandria 30 years after the birth of Jesus, but it remained as a toy, since the economy was based on slavery. Besides this, often some or many strands in society will only seek to better their own interests, no matter what happens to the nation otherwise. Today, the United States is facing this dilemma. The billionaire class and the military-industrial complex have hijacked the whole empire, and as long as their profits increase, nothing else matters. By creating conflicts and having wars overseas, there is money to be made for the small elite, and many projects have become straight-up scams. Captain Matthew Hoch, who fought in Afghanistan, gave the following example. To fight the propaganda of Al-Qaeda, the US military decided to build up radio towers in Afghanistan so they could send their own messages to the populace. The building project was given to a third-party contractor and it cost millions of dollars. But after they were done and the project was done, the soldiers realized that they had no generators that would provide power to these towers. And they weren't given any recording equipment, so they couldn't make any messages anyhow. Besides these two issues, the Afghans didn't even have radios since the country was so primitive, so they would have just sent their signals to deaf ears. The Middle Eastern wars were rife with these sorts of scams. Inside their own nations, the populace at large is seen as a money-making machine. The opioid epidemic the US is suffering through is the result of Big Pharma abusing its position, and the same is true with the extremely expensive higher education and healthcare systems. The government positions attract people who by nature were born with their hand in someone else's pocket, and once they find like-minded people at the top, the plundering is easy when they cooperate. California has been building a high-speed railway system from LA to San Francisco since 1993, and in the past 16 years, $1 billion was spent a year, and now, in 2025, only 69 miles of track is complete. In my heart of hearts, I'm afraid that democracy cannot deliver its promise and it will fail for the same reasons communism did. Despite the aim for equality, at the top you will end up with people who will only look after themselves, and they will make deals and form unofficial partnerships with other like-minded and powerful individuals. The societies that can be flexible and get over big societal humps are the ones that can see the long-term benefit by sharing what they've got, even if they are completely self-serving and self-interested, but they see how they will in the end win by the strategy. The Roman Empire was so long-lasting and successful because it let the elites of the conquered areas inside their circle. Even emperors were foreigners from some other corner of the empire than from the original center, and the local gods of conquered areas were added to the official pantheon. When the Russian Empire gained possession of Finland from Sweden in the Napoleonic Wars, it made sense for the Russians to be lenient. By being too oppressive, they would sow seeds for rebellion and for endless trouble at their own doorstep. For this reason, Finland was allowed to keep its own laws, own money, have its peasants free, and so on. Poland got the same kind of lenient treatment, and there was a joke at the time in Russia. "O great Tsar, please give to your own people what you have given to the Poles and to the Finns." Otto von Bismarck, an extremely ruthless man, was the father of the modern retirement system and many other social democratic functions that sought to soften the effects of capitalism on society. He was worried about communism becoming more and more popular in Germany, and by giving some socialism to the masses, they would not march to the communist camp. The New Deal by Franklin Roosevelt had the same logic behind it. The problem is about getting the perfect environmental mix that could lead into more equal societies, since it seems to me that by nature societies will seek to eat themselves and each other. On top of that, you would need to have shrewd enough leaders that they could see the wisdom of a more balanced long-term decisions. A lot of the time, leadership will fall into wishful thinking, self-denial, hubris and stubborn blindness. America today has not been able to learn from its mistakes. Stuck in forever wars that they can't win, and in the heady hubris of being the sole superpower after the Soviet Union fell, the leadership has been unable to see how they stand in the world today. In Beyond the Pleasure Principle, Sigmund Freud writes about the death drive. The attributes of life were at some point evoked in inanimate matter by the action of a force of whose nature we can form no conception. It may perhaps have been a process similar in type to that which later caused the development of consciousness in a particular stratum of living matter. The tension which then arose in what had been animate substance endeavored to cancel itself out. In this way, the first instinct came into being, the instinct to return to the inanimate state. It was still an easy matter at the time for a living substance to die. The course of its life was probably only a brief one, whose direction was determined by the chemical structure of the young life. For a long time, perhaps, living substance was thus being constantly created afresh and easily dying, till decisive external influences altered in such a way as to oblige the still surviving substance to diverge ever more widely from its original course of life, and to make ever more complicated detours before reaching its aim of death. These circuitous paths to death, faithfully kept by the conservative instincts, would thus present us today with a picture of the phenomena of life. If we firmly maintain the exclusively conservative nature of instincts, we cannot arrive at any other notions as to the origin and aim of life. The implications in regard to the great groups of instincts which, as we believe, lie behind the phenomena of life in organisms must appear no less bewildering. The hypothesis of self-preservative instincts, such as we attribute to all living beings, stands in marked opposition to the idea that instinctual life as a whole serves to bring about death. Seen in this light, the theoretical importance of the instincts of self-preservation, of self-assertion, and of self-mastery greatly diminishes. They are component instincts whose function it is to assure that the organism shall follow its own path to death, and to ward off any possible ways of returning to inorganic existence other than those which are immanent in the organism itself. We have no longer to reckon with the organism's puzzling determination, so hard to fit into any context, to maintain its own existence in the face of every obstacle. What we are left with is the fact that the organism wishes to die only in its own fashion. Freud was trying to figure out some sort of an answer to the destructive tendencies of life and humanity. His idea strongly resembles a religious creation myth, and it doesn't make much sense scientifically, but I would think that he meant it as an allegorical story to illustrate a bigger point, like Plato's cave story did, for example. He wasn't quite sure what he was grappling with and where he was reaching, but he was convinced that something must be there. One version is by the philosopher Byung-Chul Han in his essay Capitalism and Death Tribe. In archaic societies where one member of the tribe died, even if it was by illness, accident, or by old age, the reason for his death was always seen as the act of some other tribe or person who had used witchcraft to get rid of the now deceased. To get back the sense of control, someone else had to die, either through a conviction and execution or by a raid to a neighboring tribe. When a warrior killed a man, he would gain his essence, his mana, and thus grow stronger and stronger spiritually, for he was the one who was alive, the one who had mastered death. Sacrificing of animals was part of this balancing of the universe. According to Han, money was at least partially invented to get these sacrificial animals. And the richer you got, the more you could have sacrifices performed, thus being the one that was the most in control. In today's world, the one who has the most money is also in the most control. You can have everyone else do everything for you, so money literally is buying the time of others, and you can do everything that normal people can't do. Subconsciously, money is the thing that keeps the bad things away, keeps death itself away. At the end of the day, human beings still are the safe cavemen that we originally were, despite the technological progress we have made. And we fall back into archaic, tribalistic, instinctual thinking without ever realizing it. In war, the collecting of trophies from the fallen enemy serves the same purpose as it did for the tribal warrior. Taking a watch or a small personal belonging from the killed enemy soldier is not just a souvenir, but a magical talisman that will protect the one who stayed alive. Pictures of things like skulls serve the same purpose. And on the more extreme end, you have the necklaces of cut off enemy ears and so on. In the Finland's Winter War, one sergeant cut off the head of a dead Soviet soldier, and he boiled the flesh off of it, putting the skull trophy on display in their dugout. The men under him got fed up and said to him that either the skull goes or they will throw the sergeant out. The skull got tossed into the forest. If nothing else, it is very true that the great conquerors of history have been obsessed with death. As their empires grew and they had monuments built that indicated their greatness, What you really had was one man screaming into the void, "I was here, I mattered." Many Chinese emperors were after the elixir of immortality, and there was a very recent video clip where Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping were talking about how technology and organ transplants could extend one's life by decades. Peter Thiel has also been talking about such things. Apparently, a big problem for militaries has been the fact that people in general are not inclined to kill each other. According to the Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, the amount of ammunition that was spent in killing one person in World War II was staggering, since most people would just shoot too high, since they couldn't bear hitting the person at the other side. Same kinds of things have been said about the cruelties of fascism and communism, how much there needs to be preliminary work before you get regular people to the state where they could be ready to do extreme acts. Considering how violent and bloody human history has been, I find this weird. I keep wondering if ancient warriors suffered from PTSD. If I would in today's world witness a horrific event, for example seeing the bodies of a car accident, people would find it understandable if I was seriously shaken and bothered by the episode. Were the Vikings, Mongols or Romans bothered by the pillaging and slaughtering they did? And even if they were, that didn't exactly stop them from doing what they did. When the Japanese Empire was strengthening, the government was ready to throw out Buddhism, since it was seen as a foreign element and Shintoism was the way to go. The Buddhist leaders had to hurry to make themselves relevant to the state, so they bent their tenets to fit the new framework. Now you could reach enlightenment by marching in the army, when your sense of self melted away as you were part of the war machine and so on and so forth. The conversion happened basically overnight, and virtually everyone accepted it, and many soldiers used the new Soju Zen to enhance their fighting capabilities with religious fervor. People in general just go with what they are presented with, and the more intellectual they are, their rationalizations just become more complex. But they still are just doing the same thing. We talk about morality and ethics a lot, about choosing between right and wrong, but there seems to be little choosing happening when you read through the pages of history. Either there is no capacity to choose, since we will just do whatever we are told, or we just don't care, since this choosing would inconvenience us and complicate our sense of self. Instead of morality, you get amorality, interest groups but not the common good. All this stuff in the essay does make me think about death somewhat often. Not only the individual dies, but in a long enough time frame everything else will end too. If we can't keep it together, humanity will be gone sooner rather than later, but the sun itself will evolve into a red giant, and then shrink into a white dwarf in about 5 billion years. Not only we would need to survive as a species to this point, but we would need to have the technology to leave the solar system itself. And even beyond that, the universe itself will cease to be at some point. One theory says that the Big Crunch, the opposite of the Big Bang, would happen in about 20 billion years. In the final analysis, I think that one should be honest, even if the ending conclusions are depressing. The ancient Greeks said that philosophy should be a vehicle for accepting death, so that is one way to go. Kierkegaard, a devout Christian, always talked about faith, how in the end, in some way and somehow, things would work out. In a sense, I think faith could be taken out of the Christian context. You could say that there really is destiny, since you will have some set of specific circumstances that will lead to likely outcomes, and once those events have already happened, no matter how unlikely at first, they really did happen, and we are living with their consequences. Creation of life itself could have been so unlikely that it only happened here on planet Earth in all of the universe, yet here we are right now in this moment. Isn't there a kind of fate in that, a destiny in a certain sense? What is my precise point in this, I really don't know, but the Christians do say that faith itself is a mystery. Will we all have to lean into this direction despite our other belief systems? Maybe. Thanks for listening, have a good one.